Well, anyway, well, thanks for coming, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I can't really, the cord is only allowing me like this. I am so pleased that Marianne, my friend Marianne, was able to join us from San Diego today. She is a friend of mine. We go back a few years. And Ann Horton is probably one of the kindest, warmest people I know. And she is definitely the smartest person I know. She has a PhD, yes, I will. She has a PhD in computer science from UC Berkeley. And she came up with the idea, she invented attachments for your emails. You know how you get your pictures from your grandchildren?
Yeah.
On your computers?
Really?
Thank Ann Horton for that, okay? But more important, the reason she's here today is she's a transgender activist, and she's changed the face of the workplace and made it just friendlier and more welcoming to all people. So here I am, Dr. Ann Horton. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Ann, and my pronouns are she, her, and them.
Is that better? Or no?
It's very
Can
nice.
you turn it up the volume a little? Yes. Hold it.
Can you all hear me okay?
Can you turn it up a little bit more?
Working on it? Okay. So I'm going to start this morning. Many of you may not be familiar with exactly what transgender is. So I'm going to give you a very, very quick Transgender 101, just to get you a little bit acquainted with these. Bear with me while I share my screen.
And I forgot to mention, she wrote a terrific book. And she is willing to, for the price of $20, and that includes shipping, she'll sign it for you. So I have paper here if you want to sign up with a book, and she'll sign your name on it. Anyway, sorry, needed to do that.
Yes, thank you. I am excited to have my book out there that tells my story. So when I explain transgender, I talk about these 4 sliders. And you may have seen people in your church doing your broadcasting that have a soundboard, or at a concert, or even a stereo at home that has a volume knob, or maybe there's a bass or a treble. Fancy stereos might have 3 different knobs on them, bass, treble, and mid-range. So imagine a stereo with 4 sliders on it. And these represent the different aspects of masculinity or femininity. So the first of these is the gender identity. I hope everybody can see my mouse moving. The gender identity is a person's internal sense of themselves inside their head, who they believe, who they feel they are. And at one end of this, a person may feel they're a man. At another end of that, a person may feel they're a woman. But this is a slider, it's a continuum. And in the middle, there's a space called non-binary, which is a person who doesn't feel entirely like a man or entirely like a woman. This is kind of the new and emerging thing that we're hearing about non-binary people. We also have the concept of gender expression, which is shown on the outside of this gender person. Gender expression is how other people see you, how you express yourself to other people. So a person might express themselves in a masculine way, appear to be masculine, or they might appear to be feminine, expressing themselves so that other people see them as feminine. And there's a whole range here of androgyny and near femininity and near masculinity. Nobody is really entirely at one extreme or the other on these. This would be Barbie over here, and this might be Rambo over here. We're also and we move around. I mean, as a woman, I can wear a power suit and heels to work on Monday and jeans on Saturday. And those are very different gender expressions, but they are examples of how we can vary from time to time. The third slider is a person's sex, and this is your anatomy, whether you have indoor plumbing or outdoor plumbing. We have males at one end with outdoor plumbing, females at the other end with indoor plumbing, and there is some middle ground here. There's a category called intersex, which are people whose anatomy is not entirely one or the other. They're born with certain medical conditions. There's a whole community of intersex people who are very active about their interests, and their primary concern is that babies are born. First question somebody asks when a baby is born, is it a boy or a girl? And if the doctor says, well, I'll get back to you, not quite sure, because what they're seeing is ambiguous. There's a whole bunch of medical conditions in here that you have to be a medical doctor to understand. Things like hypospadias and androgen insensitivity syndrome and mosaic chromosomes. And the old word here for this was hermaphrodite. I don't use that word anymore. The current term is intersex. And then separate from that, we have who is a person attracted to. This is the sexual orientation. Is a person attracted to women, or is the person attracted to men, or somewhere in the middle they might be bisexual or pansexual, or some mixed category in here. And you'll notice I didn't express these as gay and straight, but I expressed them as attracted to women and attracted to men. And that's because if a person is moving around on one of these axes over here, then that does not affect their sexual orientation. I was attracted to women when I was living as a man. I'm still attracted to women. I've never been interested in men. So I went from being a straight man to being a lesbian, but my sexual orientation of being attracted to women never changed. So any given person might be anywhere on these four axes. These are independent axes. The traditional man is over here. The traditional woman is over here. But the world is full of diversity. And for example, I identify as a woman internally. I present as feminine. I was born with male anatomy, and I've always been attracted to women. That's just one example. So let's look at terms a little bit. People hear a lot of terms and want to know what they mean. The transgender community is thought to be an umbrella term because it includes many different things, and people in the community argue back and forth about what's in the umbrella, what's out of the umbrella, exactly what counts and what doesn't count. There's a whole lot of argument. So I'm using the definitions that come from the dictionary, which are the most widely accepted. If transgender is an umbrella of people that are, their gender identity or their gender expression is different than their assigned sex at birth. That's the definition of transgender. And a person who is not transgender, just a regular old person who's not transgender, or a regular young person who's not transgender, the word for that is cisgender. Cis, this is not a slur, this is a perfectly nice word. Cis means same, trans means different or across. So cis is the opposite of trans, it's just an opposite. So many of you are cis women or cis men, people who are transgender and live their lives entirely in the gender opposite their assigned sex at birth would be a trans woman or a trans man. So I am a trans woman because I was assigned male at birth and I lived entirely as a woman. There's a whole other umbrella called non-binary. Some people are moving this non-binary umbrella out of the trans umbrella. Some are including it under the trans umbrella. Lots of discussion about that. Non-binary are people that are somewhere in between the binary of male and female or man and woman. There's a lot of different variations on this. A genderqueer person might be someone who is visibly showing both signs of masculinity and femininity, like a beard and high heels, for example. Billy Porter, for example. A gender fluid person might move back and forth and present as a man some days and as a woman other days. A bigender person might be somewhere in the middle, and an agender person might not express any gender at all. Then there's the whole concept of drag. Drag is different. So some people consider it under the trans umbrella, some consider it to be separate. Drag is a performance. When you hear about a drag queen, that is a person who was born male, probably lives as a man most of the time. Most drag queens are gay, but not all of them. they are performing by dressing as women, and it's usually a caricature or a parody. They have maybe, inch-long false eyelashes, and dresses, and wigs, over-the-top feminine presentation, but their makeup is very, very skillfully done. It's not sloppy, it's really well done, but it's done in a way that they're men. And they're performing as a woman, often lip-syncing in a gay bar as the traditional drag show. And then at the end of the show, they take off their dress and their wig and their makeup, and they live their life as a man the rest of the time. There are drag queens, which are men performing as women. There are drag drag kings, which are women performing as men. Typically, they're accepting tips, and the tips will go to some charity, some local charity. So it's, in a way, it's a fundraiser, almost like a fraternal organization type of thing. The key difference between drag and transgender is something you are. Drag is something you do. People do drag, but they are transgender. And there are many drag queens who are transgender, and some drag kings who are transgender, but the vast majority are not. So that is the quick TG 101. Well, let me tell you my story in the few minutes that I have, and then I'll be happy to take your questions. So I have to stress that my story is not typical. Every journey is different, and my journey is definitely not atypical. When I wrote my book, it's unusual enough that it makes a good story because it's so unusual. Most trans people will tell you that they knew from a very early age that their gender didn't align with with how they were being treated by their parents. They'll tell you that from age 3 or 4, their earliest recollection, that they were saying, "I'm a girl" or "I'm a boy," and they may not have been taken seriously. Eventually, we get to be adults and we get to decide our own lives, and then we can transition. And now kids today are being taken more seriously than when they're young. I was an unusual case. I didn't know that there was anything different until I was 9 years old. Thought I was an ordinary boy. I was actually baptized in the LCA in Spokane, Washington. My parents had a falling out with the church when I was 6. There was a disagreement over tithing. Apparently it was not optional in their particular church. So I left the church, which but at this particular time, I was not in the church. And I was 9. My mother took me to see The Sound of Music. And you may recall in The Sound of Music, there's a number in there called 16 Going on 17, where they're out dancing in the gazebo. And my mom took me to see The Sound of Music. And Liesel's dress does amazing things in that number. You can watch it on YouTube. It's an amazing thing to watch when she twirls, and that dress twirls and bounces, and it's incredible. And I was mesmerized. It had a huge effect on me. And I started to notice dresses and skirts. And I became obsessed. I had to wear those. That was so important to me. And I did what every red-blooded American cross-dresser does. We called them cross-dressers back then instead of gender fluid. I sneaked into my mom's room and stole some of her clothes and tried them on, and somehow it made me feel good. Then I left them in a pile on my closet floor. My mom came in to do the laundry. I saw a pile of her clothes on the floor. She was not pleased. I learned very quickly that I had to hide this part of myself, that this was not something that was considered okay. So I hid it, but I accumulated a stash of clothes and I wore them when I was by myself because somehow it was soothing and calming to me. And I grew up with bits and pieces of clothing, and I would wear them in private from time to time. Graduated from high school, I did very well with computers, so I went to college at USC. Met a young lady at USC, we became engaged, and after we were engaged, I was talking with her on a park bench, and I came out to her. I said, sometimes I wear women's clothing. And she says, "That's not okay. I knew a guy who did that once. He was weird. You can't do that." And I didn't know any better, so I said, "Okay, I'll stop." And I stopped. I threw the clothes away. That's the first time I've thrown all my clothes away. something that happens to trans people a lot. It's called purging. It's very expensive. And it lasted about 2 years before the need came back. So fast forward a little bit, since this is very brief. The full story is in the book, which I encourage you to check out. Sign a copy for you. I graduated from college, was typical family, mom, dad, 2 kids, 2 young children, and the need was coming back. And so I was accumulating some clothes, and my wife caught me and decided that she needed a divorce. So I was coming to a crisis. I needed to know what to do with this. I spent a day in Phoenix at a conference. I blew off the day of the conference to spend an entire day presenting completely as a woman. And the story of that is chapter 1 of the book. It's quite the white knuckle story. In 1987, in a mall in Phoenix, presenting as a woman, it was an important day to me. And I didn't know at the end of the day what was going on, but I expected to learn something about myself. And at the end of the day, it was like, okay, how was this? Was this euphoria like I was expecting? Was it exhilarating? And the word that came to mind was boring. It was boring. I threw all the clothes away again, went home to face the music, but I didn't realize 5 years later that I had chosen the wrong word. The right word that I should have chosen was relaxing. It had been very relaxing for me. So we got divorced. It was quite the eventful divorce. But I met another young lady who didn't have any problem with cross-dressing. She says, it's just clothes. It's no problem. But I was going through a divorce, and I didn't think it was right for me. So I pushed it. I stuffed it all inside me for 6 months. And at one point, I told her I'm starting to feel cross-dress come back. So we were at her apartment at the time. She got up, went into her bedroom, came out with a manila envelope, handed it to me. And what I hadn't realized was that at the time, this was 1988, on the Phil Donahue show, they had cross-dressers on from time to time. She had written away for literature and saved it for me until the time was right, which was a really, really sweet thing to do. She waited, she didn't even tell me, she just waited. And I was ready, so she gave it to me. That got me in touch with a national sorority of cross-dressers. It's called the Society for the Second Self. It's usually abbreviated TRI-S. And that got me connected in with the community. So I started spending 1 weekend a month as a woman, socializing with other cross-dressers, learning things like makeup tips and how to pass. And my wife, by now we were married again. My wife was great for me. She would go out to dinner with me. She was fine supporting her husband as a cross-dresser. But I began to spend more and more time as Mary Ann. And I eventually found a group at work. I was working for Bell Labs at the time, and the name on the front of the building kept changing. It was Bell Labs, and then it was AT&T, and then in 1996 it was Lucent Technologies. So Lucent had a group called Equal. It was an employee resource group for gay, lesbian, and bisexual workers, and they had just added transgender to their mission statement. So I got involved with Equal. I learned a lot about gay and lesbian people, and they learned a lot about transgender people from me because I was the first one to show up. And I wound up asking them, is it possible that we could include language in Lucent's equal opportunity policy, non-discrimination policy, to protect transgender people? And the short story there is eventually they agreed to do that, and they included language that said we won't discriminate based on gender identity, characteristics, or expression. And that was the first time any Fortune 500 company had added trans-inclusive language to their policy. So that was history right there. That was 25 years ago in 1997, and that was the impetus for writing the book. That's the centerpiece, is that story of what happened at Lucent. So I launched a career as an activist from that. I was lobbying in Washington, D.C. one day, and we were trying to get a law passed that says you don't discriminate against trans people, or more accurately, we were trying to get trans added to the existing bill that would have protected gay and lesbian people. And by the way, that bill still in 2023 has not passed. It's now called the Equality Act. And they're still trying to get it passed and no prospects for passing it anytime soon. So we do not have national protection against discrimination currently. But at the end of the lobbying day, I noticed there was a woman there who was kind of like me. Most of the people that were lobbying were living full-time in their new role, what we called transsexual at the time. That would be trans women and trans men. They were very passable, very presentable. I was kind of new with this. I was a little rough around the edges. And this other woman was a little rough around the edges too. And so we got to talking. I'm thinking, maybe she's new at this too. Maybe I could make a friend here. So we got to talking. Her name was Penny Ashmont. And it turned out she was the most visible trans activist in the state of Massachusetts. She was living full-time as a woman, but she had some medical issues. And she couldn't have any surgeries because it could kill her. So we got to talking and she explained to me that she intentionally did not pass. She chose not to pass as a woman because she says people who pass all the time are not educated, they're not helping the movement because nobody knows they're trans. She says, I made it a point not to pass because that way I'm educating people every day just by going out in society and being myself. And that was very inspirational to me. I was having trouble with my voice. My voice didn't sound very feminine. Even though I put a lot of energy into making it try to sound feminine, it wasn't working. So she inspired me to do the same thing, and not to try to pass, but to just use the voice God gave me, and to educate people one at a time. And I feel that I'm doing important work by doing that. Well, also, let me share with you, I was invited to church at a Nazarene church during my first divorce. And the Nazarene church was not a good fit for me. They were... But when we moved to another town, we were right behind the Lutheran church, and we decided to try that, and it felt like I was right at home. So as Mark, I could go to that Lutheran church and it was fine. But my kids didn't feel safe with me going to that church as Mary Ann because half the kids in their school went to that church and they would go and they would get harassed. So I had to sneak into other churches to go. So I looked for an accepting Lutheran church. I found Redeemer. This is in Columbus, Ohio. I found Redeemer. And Redeemer was officially a welcoming church. They were what they called reconciling in Christ, which meant at the time that they welcomed people regardless of their sexual orientation. And I asked them, would you also officially welcome transgender people? And they said, well, we will ask the council. So they asked the council, and a few weeks later, the answer came back, no, we won't. And I was crushed. But they said, but we're willing to be educated about this. And we're willing to, once we're educated, we're willing to reconsider the question. So we did a panel. I had a friend who was a therapist who did these fancy panels with these extremely presentable transsexuals. And she said, sure, I'll be happy to do a panel at your church. Would you like to be on the panel? So I said, sure. So there were 4 of us there, 3 very presentable people that you would never know had been born in the opposite sex, and me. And we all told our stories. And people listened with open hearts. A month later, the council met and decided, yes, we will officially welcome transgender people. That was a wonderful thing. So I got involved with what they called Lutherans Concerned at the time. It's now called Reconciling Works. And they were working the big issues at the time, which was same-sex blessing ceremonies and ordaining gay pastors in committed relationships. And trans wasn't even on the radar, but I educated them about trans and got the ball rolling. And now, Reconciling Works, their official policy is much, much more inclusive. They welcome people of all sexual orientations, of all gender identities and gender expressions, and all races as well. It's very inclusive, and it's a wonderful program to become reconciling in Christ. So I've been working with some of the congregations in the San Diego area now that I'm out here. First Lutheran that I'm sitting in the library, First Lutheran right now, although you can't tell because my living room is my fake background there. Green room, we call it. But the First Lutheran, I came here in 2007 because it's reconciling in Christ. And I'm on the council, I'm an assisting minister, I'm a key part of this church, and I'm giving another presentation in an hour about putting solar panels on the roof. Busy day for me. But I'm also working with some of the other Lutheran churches in the San Diego area about their interest in becoming reconciling in Christ. There's 7 in the area now, and there's an 8th one in my hometown of Poway, California, half an hour north of San Diego, that we're working with as well. So that's a brief part of my story. I thank you for listening. There's a lot more that's in the book, but I would be happy to answer your questions if you have any questions for me.
Mary Ann, this is Bill Montgomery.
Bill?
How you doing? I was always struck by the fact, a couple of times when we were talking, I used the male pronoun for you, and I was always so embarrassed about it when I slipped up, and you would always just laugh it off and say, well, that happens sometimes. What about the difficulty some people have in making the total adjustment, and how is that dealt with?
That's a great question, Bill. Pronouns are tricky, and that's the reason I introduced myself with my pronouns at the very beginning. One of the things that happens when you meet somebody is you put a little Rolodex card. Some of you remember Rolodexes. You'll put a little Rolodex card in your brain. You young people, that's the contacts on your phone. You put a little card in your memory, you put the person's name and what they look like, their picture, and you check little boxes, the person, male or female. There's 2 boxes, you check one or the other. And for people in my generation, it's one of the other boxes. You check that in Sharpie. And when you meet the person the first time, it's very important to get the correct box checked, which is why I introduced myself with my pronouns. If you check the wrong box, it's difficult to change, and if you knew the person before the transition, it's especially hard to make that change because the pronouns just kind of slip out. So when a trans kid transitions, their parents and their grandparents have a really tough time with the pronouns. So I always tell people, if you slip up occasionally, it's fine as long as you make the effort to correct yourself. And if you don't notice, maybe the person will gently say, my pronouns are, she, her, just a sort of a reminder. And there's a third set of pronouns now with the non-binary. A lot of the non-binary folks are using they, them. So if you picture that Rolodex again, there's 3 boxes to check. It's either he, him, or they, them, or she, her. And if the person introduces themselves initially, then they're telling you which box to check in that Rolodex card. And people are going to slip up. And I find that, yes, it's very upsetting for the trans person to hear the wrong pronouns. It certainly is. But you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. So, trying to be nice about it and say, you probably didn't realize that you did that. Because most people, have good hearts and don't realize they're doing it. It's an accident. And I found that the people that slip up the most are the ones with the best hearts. Because the people that are really anti are so uptight that they're being really careful about it.
My name's Gene. I work with Francie. I know here we had a session on pronouns, and a lot of people had trouble wrapping their head around the they and them. Why would we do that? And my husband also has trouble with that. And I've been trying to explain it for months and months. Do you have any simple explanation for why we need to do this?
Sure. People in the early days of non-binary were coming up with all kinds of crazy pronouns. There were Z, Zim, and C-Sim, and all kinds of stuff like that, and it was very difficult. But people figured out, wait a minute, we're already using they, them, and we never realized it. If we are talking about some bureaucrat that we're writing a letter to off in a company somewhere, we don't know what the person's gender is. We don't know if it's a man or a woman. So we're going to say they when we're talking about that person because we just don't know the person's gender. Even if it's one person. If we're talking about road repairs, they're fixing the road, or the weather people, they're forecasting rain. We use third-person pronouns in the plural all the time when we don't know, or when it's just sort of an anonymous thing. And we've been doing this for centuries. You can go back to the 13th century and find they, them used as a third-person singular pronoun to describe something. And it really is important to use the they, them plural. If you use an it to describe a trans person, that's really insulting. So please don't do that. I've been using they, them all along, and it's natural if we don't know the person's gender. It's a little bit of an adjustment. Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue if you've met the person and you're still using they, them. So it's hard for me too. I mean, it takes some getting used to. That's my age, I'm old. The young kids are like, yeah, we do it all the time. It's no big deal. It's just natural. I think in middle school it's almost required for a little while.
We also have the same problem with God. We try to figure out, what do we talk about God as? He, she, because God is both, and in the scriptures both. And so it's been like, what do we say? It? No? I thought about going back to Yahweh, but I had to interject just a minute. The bell choir needs to leave quietly now to rehearse, but we're going to continue with questions, and so please don't skip a beat, just keep going. The bell choir will leave that quietly.
That's a great point about God. We don't know the gender. And the Hebrew Bible was not clear about that. I think the Hebrew Bible originally said God Almighty or something like that, or Yahweh.
I was told, or I read, I did an LGBTQ group in my Weight Watchers group, and I was talking to one of my friends who was in K, that's their pronoun. And we were saying that we had done some reading, or they had, that the pronoun, the neutral pronoun, like you were saying, there have been people who have identified as neutral for much longer than just recently. It's just something that people are discovering yet. Do you agree with that? Is that true? That we have had gender neutral gender identities way back to, like you were saying, back to the Middle Ages and such?
There have been, there's lots of history in many cultures of people that are considered to be a third gender. The Native Americans have the Two-Spirit people. There are, the word is escaping me right now, but in Hijra, there's a group called Hijra in India that are a third gender.
And in Samoa we had 50-50s.
Which I think is the closest you're going to find written in the Bible. And there are some very positive passages written about eunuchs in the Bible. I believe Jesus treats some eunuchs with a lot of respect. One of my favorite passages is, I think it's Isaiah 55 or 56, where Isaiah just talks about how God loves eunuchs and holds them in the highest esteem and has a very special place in heaven set aside for them. And that was, Isaiah was a long time ago. So I don't know a whole lot about anthropology, so I can't speak to anything non-biblical back that far, but I wouldn't be the least bit surprised. There are lots of documented cases of trans people, women in particular, who fought in the Civil War and dressed as men and were treated as men in Civil War times. There are plenty of examples of men who lived as women part of the time. Beaumont was somebody in France a couple hundred years ago. I believe one of the sons of, what's his name, the Mormon guy, Joseph Smith, I think one of his sons was a drag queen. It goes way back. Okay, well, I'd like to thank you all. I, again, love it. If you read my story, I wrote, pointed the shadow behind me. I spent a lot of time and love, blood, sweat, and tears writing my story. You've got the 10 minutes today, but there's a lot more in there. People tell me it's a good read. I've had a lot of people say they couldn't put it down. So I would, if you're interested in reading it, please talk to Francine for $20, including shipping. I'll be happy to sign them for you, and I'll send them all to Francine, and she'll get them distributed to you.
Thank you so much.